Hi everyone, welcome to today's talk. My name is Abid, I'm the CEO of Ardencraft, and today we'll be talking about breaking free from greenwashing. A little bit about us. We're an engineering company. We help businesses design products and then manufacture it in the Far East, but also in the UK and Europe. So our bread and butter is really on the design side and the manufacturing. A little bit about me. I'm an electronic engineer by background, and I moved to China to do a lot of the manufacturing and production out there. So I spent 4 years out there and could see firsthand a lot of the manufacturing processes and principles that was happening out there. And really that began my drive on sustainability. As we know, factories aren't the most sustainable, but we are seeing better trends this year into how they're getting better. So I'll be discussing that today. So, breaking free from greenwashing, a practical guide to sustainability, sustainable practices, and recycled materials. Now, I'm really hoping after today's talk you do get some practical tips. I'm trying to divulge as many industry secrets out there because I'm a firm believer when it comes to climate change, it's not about who has the most competitive or most sustainable product. It's can we collectively be more sustainable and actually share that. So it's a very big mind shift from what we've been doing in the past. So in today's talk, we'll be understanding greenwashing and how to avoid it. There'll be updates on CE marking and regulations in the EU, and this is great timing because a lot of what I'm talking about in the next year will be implemented for CE. And those unfamiliar with CE, that is the regulatory requirements you need to ship and sell products in Europe. And I'm sure the US and UK will follow shortly. So it's actually understanding, and we'll be diving into the EU regulations. What are carbon assessments? Scope 1, 2, and 3. This will be a requirement as part of CE. Current manufacturing trends to reduce your carbon footprint, because as part of it, it's measuring what you're doing, but also what are the steps you're doing to reduce your carbon emissions. And then I'll give you a practical data sheet of not only the benefits, but the challenges of using recycled plastics and materials. So I'll give you a little data sheet as part of it as well. And the larger part, as I'm going through this talk, I welcome you to think of what the future economy looks like in terms of products. It's coming more away from this linear model and to more of a circular model. So we'll be closing it out on that. Now, what is greenwashing? It's the act of misleading customers by falsely presenting a product or service as environmentally friendly. Now, it obviously erodes customer trust, it hinders genuine sustainability efforts, and I'll be going through a few tips on how to avoid it. Some of the key things are just being transparent and authentic to your customers. They're not expecting you to be the most sustainable company in the world right now. They expect you to be taking steps to be more sustainable. And I think that's a trap people often fall into. And so, some examples. My favorite is Ryanair. Europe's lowest emissions, lowest fares. Now, looks good, looks promising. When the UK marketing watchdog had a look at this, they were asked to present the data. And so Ryanair presented their data saying they're the youngest fleet, have the highest headcount, and have the most efficient planes. Which all sounds promising and true. The data they presented was from 2011. This campaign ran from 2019 to 2021. So their data was outdated and didn't have any other major airlines in the dataset. So they couldn't really back up their claims. My other favorite one, this is a Canadian coffee brand, and their whole business, and they've sold tens of millions of these sustainable EcoPods for Nespresso machines. You can recycle them, and you can it started in Canada, Vancouver, and Quebec, 2 major places. It's recyclable. But when you look at where it was sold, 95% of the pods end up in landfill. And just to give you context of how many pods were wasted, and this is a company whose entire stance is on the environment, if you were to line up these pods, it would go around the Earth 10 times. That's how many went into the landfill. HSBC, most sustainable bank in the UK, also asked for data. Zero data. And they are the 13th largest funder of fossil fuels. So if you were to look, and this is where the carbon assessments are important, is when you actually look at data and go into it, you need to be able to back it up. Otherwise, quite quickly, it falls apart. And even if you have the data, so McDonald's, this is a relatively new one under investigation. They've changed from plastic straws to paper straws, which again sounds great. But they've recently found that the paper straws can't be recycled, and it's not soy-based ink. So the ink could be harmful as well. So there's an investigation into that. So actually, they were doing a better job with plastic straws than they are with paper straws, because they just didn't dig deep enough. And within this as well, there's other good examples. Volkswagen, we don't have to go into that. Shell, also one of my favorites. What are you going to be doing to be more sustainable? And I want to keep this in mind. I'll be going through a couple of models of why some of these examples are greenwashing, even though on the surface they look good. And my other favorite is Persil. Great advert, saw it on the TV, now being banned in the UK. When asked for data of what they've been doing, because they were under immense pressure, absolutely nothing. That was a marketing campaign. They did nothing. So their product wasn't sustainable in any way, shape, or form. It's just a marketing ploy. So yeah, be kinder to the planet. It's very vague. It's misleading. It makes it seem like they're doing a lot for it. They didn't do anything. So that's another advert that's been banned for greenwashing. So, are you greenwashing? It's very simple. Can you explain the sustainability details for the entire practice or product? Just digging into it. If no, start again. If yes, do you have data to back up this claim? What is the data saying in this? And if you don't have data, like with the plastic versus paper straws, a small look into it. Are the straws recyclable? Can you look into it? Well, if yes, do you have data to back it up? If no, well, start again. You need the data. And if yes, and this will be part of CE, by the way, is do you have someone outside your team to review it? It could be an external company, or external to your team, but as part of the CE, you will require external consultancies to actually look at your data and validate it. And then their names against it, I guess. If yes, great. You're not greenwashing. So it's quite simple. Look into the process, get data, get someone outside your team to check it. It doesn't seem hard. And this is why I'm saying you've got to be transparent in your communication. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect from day one. It's be honest with your customers and actually tell them, look, this is what we're working to. And these are the steps that we're taking. And avoid being vague. You should try to be specific. And establish some clear and achievable goals. And maybe establish some maybe seemingly unachievable ones. It's good to have a high target, and it's good to be working towards it. And track your progress in all of this. And that's how you get these clear, sustainable goals to avoid greenwashing. There are, of course, a lot of recognized frameworks. These are relatively new. I'm not one for going into a lot of details of frameworks. I like getting a lot of the simple ones, and there's a lot available based on these higher-level frameworks. So if you're the type of person who likes reading CE regulations, you will like these frameworks. If you're not, there are summaries out there. So there are people and regulatory bodies actually working on this, and is available to help. So, CE marking. I hope you all know that it is, as you're in IoT and hardware, you need it to sell products in Europe. What will be new to it, and we'll touch about this, is product passports. If your product has a battery in it, you will need a QR code in front of it, and it will have to tell the sustainability data, the reliability data, and the life cycle of it as well. And bear in mind, this legislation, the way it's been described, is a tsunami. It's a tsunami of regulations. If this was one seat on a 15-carriage train, all the EU regulations that are coming out over a multitude of industries would fill up the entire train, seats and people standing. So these are coming out. They are currently being signed and finalized, and we expect a lot of this coming out in the next 6 to 12 months. And so what you would require, and this is specific to IoT and hardware, bear in mind, there is a lot of regulations. Scope 1, 2, and 3 for you and your whole supply chain. I put asterisks on 3 because first it'll be scope 1 and 2, and in the next slide we'll go over what this means. But it means for you and your whole supply chain, and that means your main supplier, their sub-suppliers, their sub-suppliers, and you're getting it all the way through. It might seem impossible and quite scary to do it, but there are factories already, and this is also in China, in Europe, in the US, who have this data and have really started. It's possible, it's achievable, it is a bit of hard work, but let's put it this way. Do you want to start now, or do you want to start when you have about a month left for CE? You know, these are the choices, and it's always better to start looking at these regulations earlier than later. Have carbon data on hand. You've got to see what your product has, and this all goes to the product passport. You know, you've got to have visible QC data. Scary, but they're asking for visible QC data. What is your QC at your manufacturing? What is your failure rate? And what is your product life cycle? And this is important. Imagine you're in a supermarket and you've got 2 power banks side by side. You actually don't know what the difference is. Sure, there's some marketing stuff. Maybe one is kinder to the planet, but you don't know. And the point of these passports is it gives you all the data and the information. There will be a template given by the EU. It's not been released or finalized yet, but there'll be a template of what data you need to put on this QR code, which will be the product passport. So suddenly, if you're a product designer who uses a battery that has 200 cycles and then it degrades to 80%, versus someone who does 400 cycles down to 80%, this should be known. A customer should know you're using an inferior battery. And that's the whole point of these product passports. And also reliability data. We're moving away from using a product and then binning it or only using it for 2 years. People want it for longer, 5 to 10 years. And we'll be exploring this idea of making products more serviceable and not just recyclable, because every time someone else uses the same product, you're actually diminishing and the amount of carbon needed to make that product. It's great. It'll be very little. And so more reliable products means the more they'll be out there and also more repairable. And of course, the importance of compliance. I mean, in short, if you don't do it, you can't sell your product. So it's actually good the EU has caught up on this, because a lot of people have been talking about these changes, and the EU are one of the first countries to say, we are putting this through. It is happening. Sure, they're struggling to get it signed off. It was meant to be signed off this month. It's not. But the point they're at that stage where they're trying to sign off these legislation means we're close. 6 to 12 months is my estimation. And then it's going to hit us like a tsunami. Now, I've got a question in terms of the importance of supply chain. How many single-use plastic bags does your product use right now? And what I mean is all of your components and part of your BOM, do you have plastic bags like this that you may not even see because your factory takes out the parts and when it's empty it bins? When I was in China, a lot of factories would have a huge pile of plastic when making products, and the products go into nice pulp packaging, so it looks like it's plastic-free, but mountains of plastic. So this is the importance of actually investigating your whole supply chain. And there's solutions for this. Pulp trays, cardboard trays. You can put the nuts and the screws and the bolts or whatever in there. And a good question, sure, PCBs need ESD packaging. You can do that with pulp tray. And the idea is you can return this back to the original supplier, again, helping with these carbon assessments. They're not big changes. Don't go for biodegradable plastic. I have yet to find a plastic that is actually biodegradable, not under lab conditions, and when it goes into microplastics, isn't harming the environment. Because if plastics are bioplastics degrade faster into microplastics, that means instead of having a problem of microplastics in 300 years, we have it in 50 years, which is just accelerating the problem of using plastics to begin with. So it goes back to actually digging into the data. And if anyone finds a good biodegradable plastic, please let me know. I've done a lot of research in this. I haven't found one with good data to back it up, like maybe an academic research paper. It's actually out there. And same when you go to paper, look at what the ink is. Is it soy-based ink? Or is it actually made from harmful chemicals? A lot of this you can already ask your supplier. So going into the scope assessments, Scope 1 are direct emissions from your actual company. And this is buildings and products and vehicles you own. Scope 2 are the actual emissions in terms of electricity. So within this as well, it's, what's your purchased energy? How do you do your heating and cooling? And then Scope 3, which is my favorite, is everything else. So if you lease any of your equipment or any of your building, then it's not your problem because it's in Scope 3. Which is interesting. If we were to do a Scope 1 and 2 assessment of hardware pioneers, we would not take any of this event into account because it's leased. They don't own this building. So that's an interesting, another form of greenwashing. Everyone's saying, hey, we're really sustainable. Look at that. Scope 1 and 2. I bet you Shell can be really sustainable. If they leased all of their assets, they would be the most sustainable company in the world. And that would be Shell. So that's the important. If you're putting it into Scope 3, you can't ignore it. Because eventually it's coming back into the legislation. If you're ignoring it, you're making it work harder for you, and then you're going to have to repeat it with your whole supply chain. And it's a lot of work to do. You've got to let alone convince your suppliers to make your product, but also do these carbon assessments as you're doing it. So try not to ignore Scope 3. That's what a lot of people have been doing, and it's resulted in a lot of greenwashing. And so, going back to the practical steps, it's measure. Actually see where you're at. It's reduce implementing strategies, and we'll be talking about this. It's having a few targets, and it's just improving. It's not a hard model. And a lot of this is out there, and it's also talking to your customers. It's being transparent about it. You're seeking feedback, and you're continuously improving. I'm saying this again, but, people aren't expected for you to be perfect the first. So this is the first model I'll be starting off. It's talking about the resources, energy, and the human element. I really like it because you're looking at not just your resource consumption, it's whether you're recycling the plastics. Are you being energy efficient? Are you encouraging customers to reduce their CO2 emissions and improve their home environment? And obviously replacing hazardous substances. And so the Shell one, if you were to apply this model, they're hitting the human element. Are they arguably using more efficient machines? And are they using oil or not, right? What is your actual core resource? So that's why the Shell case is interesting, is they're hitting the human element, but in actuality, you need to hit all three to really not be greenwashing and be doing good for the environment. Otherwise, well, you're not. And when the CE regulations come in, your customers will know, because you need to present that data. And so the trends, we've touched upon it, use of recycled materials, it saves energy, and this helps offset a lot of your carbon. Sustainable packaging, FSC, that is the Forest Alliance, and they make sustainable forestry. So if you see that logo, you can use that in terms of your packaging. Soy-based ink, now we've talked about how the compounds aren't petroleum-based, so they're better for the environment. It also eases the paper recycling facilities, as it's more easily removed. And you can ask for an ink data sheet. If in doubt, ask for a data sheet for the ink. Because if they don't have the data sheet, well, you need the data sheet for the certification, so it means it's an uncertified ink, in which case you don't use the ink. So your supplier should always give you a data sheet, or they're hiding something. And I want to talk about LG. So LG have recently released a 95% recycled plastic. Again, it hits this. We're not going to be perfect. 100% recycled plastic is hard to use. LG found a 95% mix, which is a lot easier, a lot more reliable, and starting to get cheaper. And we currently have factories in China who are using this for a wide range of products. And the cost is only 50 cents, 70 cents more per product as well. And we're talking about small to medium-sized products. So it's not a big increase. And this is a big game changer, because LG are one of the first to really use this, and there's a lot more coming out. I feel like 6 years ago, recycled plastics had a bad name, and that's because we didn't quite find the mix. We are now getting to the point where we have more experience with the recycled plastic, so we're getting better mixes. You gotta imagine, we've used raw plastic for what, 50 years? That's 50 years of getting the cost down. We've barely touched the surface for recycled plastic. Imagine what that would be in 50 years' time, right? And that's the thing. if things don't work out now, keep re-reviewing it because it will get better. That's what we're striving for. So LG did a really good job with this. It's a brand everyone knows and trusts. I encourage you to look into it for some of your own products. There's an industry secret for everyone to actually look. And as we talked about, inconsistent quality is some of the challenges with recycled plastic, limited availability, and also higher costs. So LG has really, gone above and beyond to prevent a lot of this and tackle these problems. And one step you can do is, have a look at the quality control of your plastics at the plastic injection level. What you should be taking away from this talk is suddenly you need to see what your supply chain is doing. You can't really cover your eyes anymore and just narrowly ignore it because you need to as part of CE. So these are small steps you can do and set up long-term partnerships. Actually work with your suppliers. Say, look, this is what we're aiming for. Can we hit that? And so it's going back to this model again. We've talked a lot about the resource element, and you're all familiar with the human element. I think the increase to recyclability and also design for disassembly, we don't talk a lot about. And so, as part of your design criteria, are you designing for repair? An example, are you using screws rather than glues? Glue is hard to disassemble, screw isn't. I feel like we're getting to a point where we don't really care if it's the newest, greatest tech. We care if it's sustainable. So customers are starting to accept screws again. We're going backwards in that way. How many people can say that they can press the button on their product 10,000 times and it'll survive? It's a standard for a lot of engineering companies who actually care about reliability rather than just the newest design. So you could do that test. Another test, drop test. Can you drop your product 1.5 meters onto concrete 26 times? That's another standard requirement for us. So it is possible. And cell test reports. How good is your battery? Because the idea in all of this is if your product is more reliable and durable, it will last longer in the field, so you can actually get more uses out of it. And if it's repair friendly, if you're screwing it out, and I'm not saying repair the PCB, I'm saying replace the PCB, or repair the battery, replace the battery. Make the repairability as easy as possible for you, and suddenly it's not that costly. And you can get a second, third, fourth, fifth life of it, which helps your carbon assessment. Because this all ties back to CE. If you're doing this, then you'll have a very good CE report, and everyone will see it on your product passport. If you're not, you're going to be left behind, and the data's out there readily. One thing you can do today, battery test reports. Don't be afraid of technical details. So going through this, what is your nominal and typical capacity? What's the impedance? Maximum charge. Your usage temperature. Is it minus 20 to 60 or 0 to 30? And this is all real data as well, that you should be looking at your battery cells. And we talked about the capacity, heat abuse, overcharge, drop test standards. The cool thing about this is you need to report on every single one of these to get the minimum fire safety certificate for a battery. So if your supplier says, oh, we don't have this, that means your cell is not certified. So you could just ask them for their fire safety certification, which they should give unless they're hiding something. But typically whenever we talk to a good supplier, they will always provide their certification and test report, which will have all of this information. And if you just look for these key points in it, it's about a 7-page document. You can actually make a quick comparison of all of your batteries, which ones are good and which ones are not. And the reason this is important, we're getting away from the idea of this linear economy, this take, make, and dispose, to more of a circular economy. And what I want to show, and I think what people misunderstand is they confuse these two. What we mean by circular is, you do your production, you have your product, you use it, you take it back, you disassemble, technical nutrient as a catch-all for repair it in some way, shape, or another, and then you put it back into production. So that's circular, as opposed to make, use, and then put in the bin, which is linear. And so with this model as well, it's important to distinguish between technical and biological. I feel like people get to this point and then kind of jump to the biological one, and then realize it's really hard to get biodegradable everything. and then despair because it's really hard. But in actuality, it's really confusing that you're trying to make everything biodegrade, because in actuality, to live with the planet, we're not talking about everything needs to degrade to nothing. We're talking about using resources in a sustainable way. So you can use some resources, which sounds a bit, voodoo almost in sustainability, that you are allowed to use raw materials as long as it's in a sustainable way. So everything doesn't need to biodegrade. You need to make it repairable. And that's why it's good to distinguish these two cycles, because if you are making it repairable and having 4, 5, 6, 7 use cases out of it, you are doing a very good job. You are ahead of the curve. That is groundbreaking, because so many people are not. So you don't need to worry if it biodegrades or not. And if your product is more towards the biodegrade, as an IoT event, I feel like it's not. Focus on the technical cycle. Don't focus on getting your products to biodegrade, because you're already doing a good job if you're getting multiple use cases out of it. And so you should really be thinking about a different design criteria. It's, are you designing for reuse, repair, disassembly, modularity? Are you designing for essential resources? Do you have to have all of these features or not? How do you recover the material? How do you optimize your design? Is it the best one you can do with those components? How about with unwanted resources? Can you use unwanted resources that you might not have thought of in your product? Does it regenerate? Now, that's less IoT and maybe more furniture and T-shirts, but can it regenerate? But I guess you could do it with your packaging. FSC packaging technically regenerates. Design for access, I think that's something we forget about a lot, is people with disabilities, whether it's obvious or not, can they use your product? Because it's actually working with the planet, but also adding more of a human element to it. And I feel like we forget about that in our design criteria. Multifunctionality, another interesting one. Can your product be used in other interesting niche situations the second or third time? Could you disassemble it and make something else in another market that could be useful? Design for compost, again, talked about the biological and technical cycle, more applicable to your packaging. And design for longevity. Again, how reliable and durable is it? And so when you're thinking about this at the beginning of your product design, it really gets you thinking and designing a product that will last, because this is where we're going to. And this is a big change to our normal design criteria. And so it's a shift. We're going away from linear to circular. The EU is saying we need to. That's why they're releasing this. And really, products in the future are actually going to this circular system. And so, in terms of the practical steps, it's product design considerations. We've talked about this. It's collaboration. It's what we're doing here today. We're actually working together, reviewing the information I'm giving you, seeing if it is applicable to sustainability, is it not, and I'm giving you tips as well. That is collaboration. Because we have to work together to protect the planet, not work against each other. And what we haven't touched about, but hinted, is a reverse logistics scheme. There's a good example of BV, one of the biggest plastic cup manufacturers, and Glastonbury. So Glastonbury have loads of single-use disposable cups. One of my good friends from Rubbish Ideas worked with them, and we all know traditional recycling is not great. So instead of taking all these plastic cups into traditional recycling, what they did was sent it back to the manufacturer. So suddenly, they get the cups back, and they set up a line to recycle the plastic back into new cups. So actually, that saves a lot of carbon. So it's like, can you do the same? Can you actually repair and do a reverse logistics schemes? And I'm already talking with DHL, as what they're thinking about is when they're delivering parcels, is can they take back products to then give back to the other company? It's literally a reverse logistics scheme. It'll be really interesting if we can figure out a system like that, because big companies are asking for this. And so if your product's not really ready to be repairable and all of these trends are coming out, you're going to be left behind. And when you're left behind, by the time the regulations come in, people will know you're left behind. So it's really not a great situation to be unless you're starting early. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do. It's explore leasing, it's product as a service, it's sharing, it's how do you get more use out of this product rather than just throwing it in the bin. And hopefully a lot of this, encourages the transition to a circular economy. It's driving sustainability and fostering long-term relationships, because that's what we're having now with customers. It's not suddenly 2 years or 6 months. It's not fast, disposable. It's sustainable. It's long. It's reliable. We're really going back to our roots, how we used to design before single-use plastic. And so hopefully, through this, we're preparing you for the future economy. It's doing sustainability assessments. It's analyzing the environmental impact across your value chain, your company, your product. It's setting ambitious targets, and it's committing, to bold, measurable objectives and implementing these action plans. And I know I've come back through this over and over again, but it's to reiterate, we're working together to save the planet. It's knowledge sharing. It's about doing the research and development and collaborating across the industry. It's a big shift to what we're used to. It really is. But these are the trends, and this is what's happening, whether it's a big company or a small company. And soon, everyone will have to do the same, because certifications, weirdly enough, as slow as they usually are catching up quick, especially in the EU. And it will follow soon everywhere else. So, to kind of summarize here, hopefully you've got some key takeaways. What is greenwashing, how you avoid it, updates on CE regulations, how to do carbon assessments, manufacturing trends, recycled materials, and the circular economy. And hopefully I've given you the top level of this. It's a lot of deep knowledge and a lot of work that needs to be done, but once you've done it, it gets a lot easier, actually. And people are currently doing it. And hopefully we explored some solutions well. It's the transparency, it's setting targets, it's adopting frameworks, if you're the type of person who likes frameworks. It's stakeholder engagement, it's carbon footprint reduction, and it's exploring a circular economy, because the economy is changing. And what you've hopefully learned is, sustainability is not just a trend, it's a business imperative. It's happening. Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. Just like GDPR, everyone thought it was never going to happen. It happened, everyone panicked. But that's a bit different to vetting your entire supply chain. That's a bit different to implementing GDPR. But that's what people are thinking. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's going to happen, and everyone's going to panic because it's a lot of work. So I encourage you not to be in that situation. And have a genuine commitment. It's measuring your actions, it's having the transparency, taking some risks, and getting on board with the regulatory compliance. It's going to hit us like a tsunami. I don't think a lot of companies are ready. And when it comes out, we need to be paying close attention, because you need to make your product repairable pretty quickly and use a lot of the things we've talked about here. And it's embracing the circular economy. I think you can't ignore it. The scooter sharing, bike sharing, car sharing, it's all happening. The average use of a private car is 5%. 95% of the time, your car is doing nothing. So it's going back to the sharing. Suddenly, if you can get more uses out of, let's say, your car, that's good for the environment. That impacts your carbon score. That helps your carbon score. And so I hope you can see sustainability is a shared responsibility. It requires a lot of collective effort by all of us. And hopefully we can learn, but also innovate and collaborate on a sustainable future. Thank you. Cool. We could start with questions. I think there's a microphone coming around.
So, I get it's really good that the CE certification is going to bring in this regulation with the QR code that people can go on. They can look at all the stats of everything that the energy profiles and whatever of the stats of the product. But Are there also going to be like kind of hard regulations coming in about what companies can and can't manufacture? And I guess where I'm coming from this is like, is this just going to end up being another tool that companies can use to switch the conversation away from, legislation that needs to be forcing companies to build things in a certain way, onto, as individuals, we all have to try and reduce our carbon footprint?
So what the EU is trying to do is they're trying to deal with it and not make it as another way of greenwashing. This is why a lot of it's been slowed, is how do you genuinely make companies drive more towards sustainability? And it's hard. And so that is the goal. And within this as well, there is a lot of regulations coming in. It's just not one tool. It's industry-wide, regardless of what industry you're doing. So I'm sure it's not going to be perfect at the beginning. It never is. But it's a big step to get people thinking. Mm-hmm. And when you think about a future economy, it is shifting away, and the legislation's trying to catch up for it. So I do applaud the EU for at least making a big effort to get to this point. Because when I first heard it, I didn't really believe it, that it's gotten to this point, because we're lagging behind. But they are going forward. Okay. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Great talk. Thank you. Two questions. First of all, do you have any idea what the penalties are going to be for non-compliance with the new CE legislation? I mean, I don't expect any detail, but in principle, what's their thinking about penalties and
So they've been
incentives?
reviewing the GDPR penalties, because what people typically did was they were so small that you could ignore them. And what they're trying to do is relative penalties to the size of your company, so you can't necessarily ignore it. And when the regulations come out, it's going to hit the biggest companies first. FTSE 500, you're first on the list. A year later, they're going to then hit medium-sized companies, and very quickly afterwards, it will be startups and small businesses. The end goal is for everyone, starting with the big polluters with heavy fines, and then doing it proportionately down. So that's what they've been discussing at the moment.
Do you feel, if I have a supplementary,
Yeah, of
do you
course.
feel that the UK has got anywhere near the required number of inspectors? Because we don't do very well on trading standards at the moment. It's very much lip service or greenwashing towards CE regulations, and I can see that it's going to be even worse with this stuff coming through.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was talking about it to some of my colleagues at the European Chambers of Commerce, and they were saying it's interesting UKCA has been delayed in terms of the implementation, and CE is still allowed. Their theory is the UKCA might just copy what they've done because it's easiest, because they haven't done a lot.
But you've still got to have the courts lined up to support the penalties and the consequences of not complying with CE.
Yeah.
And we don't have a great relationship with the European Court of Justice, and I suspect this will be the same kind of situation.
Yeah, and I suspect that's also why we've delayed UKCA till the end of next year to try and establish that.
If I may just one,
Yeah, of course.
I have a concern from a very small sample. My experience is that young people are far less interested in this stuff than people of my generation. Discuss.
I think you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, define young. Are we talking about 10 or? I feel like so far, any factory or any company who are really pushing on scope 1 to 3 sustainability efforts have been, between 30 to 40, some younger, 25, rarely older, unless you're in legislations. So I feel like collectively we're getting better. I mean, sure, not everyone really cares. I mean, we saw that through COVID, right? Let alone the environment. So I feel like we're making some big transitions. I've seen some Chinese factories who do better than UK ones in terms of the environment, which is crazy. I was not expecting that. But it's happening, and it's growing, and there's legislation to follow through. So I feel like maybe the older and the younger are working together to make it happen. So suddenly it's not something you can ignore. You kind of have to do it.
Yeah, I have one question.
Of course.
Do you know the comparative cost differential between the legislations where you've got repairability, you've got the traceability and the whole compliance around it versus someone who, let's say, is manufacturing for the US, especially in the Brexit scenario where if you can import from the US as against someone who's got EU regulations, do you know the cost differential that you would see with those kinds of models?
So are you saying how much it would cost to get the certification done?
No, not certification done, but really if I were to build a product which is C certified for EU as against something that I built in the US.
Oh, I see. So
In the US, repairability, I don't know the regulations well enough in the US.
yeah, the US is flagging behind, it's true. But the idea, it's similar to GDPR. If you implement it in Europe, you're going to... You have a choice. Do you sell only in the US, or do you sell in Europe, or do you try both? If you're going to try both, you're going to go to the more harder regulations. Because if you don't, then you can't sell into Europe. So it's arguably, what you're saying is there a cost difference? But I'd actually say, which company is going to make a product twice? Once with glues without screws, and once with. That's repair friendly. I feel like once you've done all of that work, it's a shame to ignore it for the US. I remember the US regulations will catch up. I'm surprised Cali 65 isn't there. That's one of the strictest already. And I'm sure quite quickly in California they're going to catch up with the EU regulations. But you're right, it's going to have its challenges. There's no easy answers because it's not quite out there yet. But a lot of deep thinking needs to be done in this. You know, it's how does your product play in the future economy? And that's what we've got to start, think about sooner rather than later. You know, it's like doing one of your university papers back in the day. Are you going to spend weeks doing it or the day before? You're going to get a better grade if you spend weeks doing it. So that's what we're trying to encourage here is, these things are happening. We need to start thinking about it, and that's a great thought. I wish I had the answer, but at some point, this information will be out there, and hopefully there will be more clarity. Okay. I think that's the last one. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much, everyone.